Welcome to another episode of Tank Talks, your personal think tank for all things startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. On today's show, we have Paul Martino, co-founder and general partner at Bullpen Capital, to discuss why product market fit should always be evolving for startups and growth stage companies. I absolutely love this chat, as Paul brings so much energy and passion to every conversation, especially when it comes to product. Paul co-founded Bullpen Capital over a decade ago and has been the founder of 8 companies, including one of the first social networks called Tribe. He's an active angel investor in companies like Zynga, 2Mogul, Udemy, and FanDuel, to name a few. Today, we asked Paul to share his views on how teams can determine if they actually have product market fit and what myths people shouldn't trust when it comes to believing if they have product market fit or not. We talk about the importance of velocity of iteration in product development and the best test for founders to consider for product market fit versus the vanity metrics we often obsess over. Finally, we talk about the risk in premature scaling before finding product market fit and the lessons Paul learned from his time as a founder that other founders should be aware of. Now let's get into this week's chat with co-founder and general partner at Bullpen Capital, Paul Martino. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Paul.
Wonderful to be here.
So as I mentioned today, I wanted to talk about why product market fit should always be evolving for startups. Let's kick things off and discuss what product market fit really means, in your opinion, and why is it so important for all businesses to think about it?
So we have a phrase at Bullpen Capital, which is, it's early, but it works. And that is our internal interpretation of product market fit. And again, it's almost impossible to define, but if you're a multi-time founder, you kind of have this instinct, like, I know what it feels like when it works, and now it's time to start scaling it, as opposed to, I'm in a dark room and I'm trying to find a light switch. And so it's early, but it works. There's hallmarks of it. Hey, I have one salesperson, but I know how to train the second one. Oh, that probably means you have product market fit, as opposed to, I'm the founder and I have to evangelically sell every one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Andy Ratcliffe at Benchmark said that when a great team meets a lousy market, the market wins. And when a lousy team meets a great market, the market wins. But when a great team meets a great market, something special happens. And basically what he's saying is nothing can replace a great market. So at Bullpen, what do you think is the most important thing to focus on? People, market, or team at the very beginning?
I got taught a version of this actually from another kind of part of the Andy Ratcliffe tree. Randy Komisar over at Kleiner Perkins, he used to always say, from Bill Campbell, there are 3 kinds of people in venture. There are product people, there are product pickers, there are people pickers, and there are market pickers. And figure out which of the 3 of them you are. I personally am more of a people picker in that taxonomy than I am a product or a market picker. And we have found that my partner, Rich Melman, I started the fund with, he's a market picker, very much of the Sequoia mold. And we found that by having a team at Bullpen of both product, market, and people pickers, you kind of get the best coverage. Because occasionally, one of them will see a deal that nobody else does, because only on the people axis will you realize this is a deal you want to do, or only on the market axis is this a deal you want to go do. Because it's rare you're going to have a team come in that has a perfect product, a perfect team, and a perfect market. Like, if life was that easy, venture would be a simple business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we do the same thing at Ripple. I mean, I think the reason why people tend to say it's team first rather than market is because why would you be investing in a dead market? Everyone can figure out what a dead market is. And some people think they could always say and scope out a good market. But scoping out a great team early on is where I think venture capitalists think they have an edge. Would you agree with that?
Totally agree, especially when it's pre-product market fit. See, post-product market fit, where you actually have numbers to justify if the product works, or if the sales efficiency is there, or if the CAC to LTV are right. Great. If you're post-product market fit, I don't actually need to do the rectal exam I need on the team as much. I need to know that they can hire scaling executives to take it to the next level. But if I'm pre-product market fit, I mean, what else do I have other than the advantage to potentially get the experts to stack the deck for the team for my endeavor to be successful?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's absolutely where we think we add the most value is at that pre-product market fit, when the team is just getting off the ground, when they have no real vision of where they're going, is where we want to feel like we can actually pick them out and get them on the right path. Now, let's talk about how they stumble onto that sort of product market fit serendipity. A lot of people think that the process to get to serendipity seems to us as investors incredibly consistent. Firstly, do you agree with that? And do you believe that if a company or a team before had found product market fit at their last startup, they are more likely to repeat it again at their next company?
So I think on the enterprise side, that's absolutely the case. And on the consumer side, I think it's a lot more murky, right? I mean, consumer is way more fickle. Product market fit is more difficult to get. The value proposition has got to be just right, a little to the left or right, and you might miss the mark. Enterprise, a different story. You get the band back together. You know how to do the Gartner Magic Quadrant. You know how to do the competitive kill sheet. You know how to train the sales force. I like my chances of a repeat enterprise founder finding product market fit multiple times in a row more than I do my consumer CEOs, because I do think no matter how smart you are on the consumer side, there's just a lot more luck for product market fit on the consumer side than there is on the enterprise side.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the signals that you can take on enterprise B2B SaaS is a lot cleaner than a lot of the noise and signal crossing in the consumer side. And consumer habits are just changing so quickly. I mean, we talked about how Clubhouse is probably off, the highs that it was only a month or two ago. But, if you were to say, would you make a bet on it 6 months ago? You probably would have.
Exactly. Consumers are fickle. They change their mind. 100 competitors can literally show up overnight. And you can't have 100 enterprise competitors show up overnight. That just can't happen.
No, absolutely. And, let's talk about, answering that value hypothesis question, which is which part should you start with first, the market or the product? So you've got the team, they're already set in place. Now where you go to, the market or the product? In your opinion, what do you think startups should start with first, the product or try to find the market? Or should they start with the market and try to find the product?
Earlier in my career, I was a start with the product guy. Like when I think about my first start, I've now started 8. I've invested in 130 and I've started 8 on my own. You asked me that question a decade ago. I am a start with the product guy because I'm a classically trained CS grad student, right? I'm a PhD dropout, computer science. I will start with the product. My technology is so cool, I'll find a problem to solve, right? There's a certain weird arrogance to that. And after now investing in 130 companies, it's been beaten out of me that that's the wrong way to do it. You start with a problem in the real world, meaning the market, and then you go solve a problem. You don't think that by sitting in your basement at your pen, Dr. Dre, a pen and a pad in my lab, right? I have gone a 180 from the early part of my career on this, and I'm 100% in the market side of this. You need to start with a business case. You need to solve a real world problem. You need to see an opportunity nobody else sees, and then you will figure out how to build the product to solve that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's find the market and find the solution or the why before you even start thinking about the product solution. It's the why solution that you need to actually come up with first. But there's so many markets out there that you couldn't even think exist when you probably were coming up with an idea or a solution. So how should people think about what is a true market?
Right. So let me use the story of the founding of Bullpen to answer this, because I think you'll get a kick out of this. So Bullpen was my 5th company I started. And I call it a company because it still feels that way to me, even though it's a venture firm. We identified a hole in the marketplace, which is that between seed and Series A, there was going to be this gap because you were going to have thousands, we said hundreds of seed funds, and there'd only be about the same number of Series A funds. And I kind of was a computer geek and I was a math guy, and I saw a market problem forming. What if the number of A funds stay the same, but we go from 20 seed funds to 200? By the way, we went to like 2,000 seed funds. And so I was sitting there going, well, what is the product we need? And I called up my buddy Mike Maples. Mike Maples offered me to be his first partner at Floodgate. And I was like, I'm not going to be a venture person. Venture's for weenies. I'm going to stay an entrepreneur. So when I was identifying this product, this market need for a product in between seed and A, Maples calls me up, he laughs. He says, Martino, the only way you're ever going to capitalize on this is if you start a venture fund and become a weenie like me. And so that to me is the essence of the question you're asking. The last thing I wanted to do was start a venture fund, but the only way to capitalize on the market inefficiency I found was to start a venture firm. That was my product. It was a unique venture fund, was the product I had to go build. The last product I wanted to go build, but it was the one that was required for the entrepreneurial insight I had from a market perspective.
Yeah, so it sounds like the market was bubbling up in your face and you couldn't ignore it. And it eventually pushed you to solve the problem with a product as in the venture fund, but it was the market that pushed you over the edge to do it that way. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Because if I had started with the product, I would have had yet another undifferentiated value proposition as a venture firm.
Right. Absolutely. I love that. And that makes a perfect sense when it talks about venture funds or just startups in general. Let's talk about something that I think a lot of people hear about, but they don't really understand what it means, which is the importance of speed or velocity of iteration in the product when it comes to finding product market fit. Can you talk about the importance of that velocity and why people should focus on it?
Matt, I love that question. I can't tell you how important and fundamental that is. A lot of times people will say, we've invested about 50% of our portfolio is in the Bay Area, 50% of our portfolio is not in the Bay Area. And we have deals in places like Singapore and Edinburgh, Scotland, et cetera. So we're all over the world for our other 50% of the deals. And people will frequently say to me, Paul, you invest in Scotland and you invest in Singapore and you invest in Silicon Valley. What's the difference? I tell them the same thing every time. The difference is iteration speed, period. You can walk down 2nd and Howard and run into somebody who gives you a tip on iteration speed that you won't walk down the street and run into in Edinburgh, Scotland. That's where my company FanDuel was from. I use them as an example. And by the way, FanDuel is a $20 billion company. But their iteration cycle was never as fast as Grove, for example, one of our consumer products companies right in San Francisco. Because guess what? They're in San Francisco. You can walk down the street and run into 3 people who will actually accelerate your iteration speed because the cycle time is lower. Because guess what? An Oracle told you what the answer was, as opposed to that you had to iterate 3 more times in your basement because you didn't have that dude you ran into walking down the street. Now, obviously, COVID, people aren't actually walking down the street anymore, and COVID has made the world flatter on this. I think iteration times improved outside of Silicon Valley since you weren't walking down the street walking into that person anymore. So the rest of the world has caught up a little bit as the result of COVID, but there's a stark pre-COVID difference between the iteration cycles of my Silicon Valley companies and my everywhere else companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the iteration, what people maybe call a pivot, we just call it iteration, is that instant feedback loop to change in the solution that you can implement, whether, you're a consumer product or an enterprise SaaS product, instantly when people are giving you real-time feedback. And you're right, it happens a lot more face-to-face than it does happen in a COVID world, but we're starting to see it still pick up as in our portfolio companies. When the market they thought was there doesn't pan out, they quickly iterate on the product and go switch over to, e-commerce, let's say, with the same technology, but a different go-to-market strategy. But how should you analyze the ability of a team to iterate and the speed at which they can iterate before you've made the investment?
I'll geek out for you on a second. Remember high school calculus, Newton's method for finding the roots of an equation? Do you remember how that worked? Step 1 is start with a guess. Literally, that's step 1 of Newton's method. Start with a guess, do this thing, and you'll get the next best answer. Plug that back in, and you'll get the next best answer. Literally, it is the definition of iteration. Well, guess what? The closer you start with your initial guess, the faster it works. And so that's what you need to analyze when a team walks in. How close do you think they are as a starting point to the answer? If you feel like they're off by a country mile, they're probably never going to iterate their way to the answer. If you look at it and your gut says, damn, they're pretty close, Newton's method is going to work because they started closer to the answer. So their initial product presentation, their initial market description, their initial go-to-market strategy, that is the Newton's method guess. And you have to have an internal clock if you're good at venture about how close you think they are to the right answer.
That's interesting. For us, we typically like to see where companies started, how many different iterations and pivots they took to get to where they are now, where they're pitching us, and how they thought about going from one stage to the other. We spoke with a company the other day where we had met them about a year and a half ago, and they are still in pre-deployment stage. They're still holding back, a wait list and, not going live with the product because they just want to get it right. And we were saying, go, just get the product out there, get feedback in real time and let people play with this thing. Because if 2 years goes by since the last time, you raised money or we chatted, people are going to question what happened if you get it wrong.
I totally agree. One of my current endeavors is I'm also an executive chairman of a new company. We're building a next generation sports betting facility in Pennsylvania. We're trying to create a real world affiliate. There's website affiliates that sign you up. What if you created the coolest restaurant in Philadelphia and you got people to sign up for FanDuel and DraftKings when they showed up? And it's a very interesting philosophical question because we have people, our interior designers are like, Paul, show me what the design needs to be. And I go back to them, Matt, the same way you do. I'm like, well, I need it to be flexible enough so that when I lay it out the first time, if it doesn't work, I can move some stuff around. And they're like, dude, that's not how you lay out a restaurant. I'm like, maybe that is how you should lay out a restaurant. And so it's really cool because we're trying to apply a lot of these concepts from website development to a physical build out. And you see how incompatible those two worlds of thought are. And if we get this right, I think it's going to be a really cool thing where we can actually kind of real-time A/B test layouts for conversion in the physical world the way you are. Is that in the gutter or the top of the website? It's a near and dear to my heart thing. And when I explain the Silicon Valley point of view of rapid iteration to a traditional interior designer, heads explode.
Yeah, I don't know why when you gave that restaurant analogy, I immediately thought of the night the Roxbury example where they put the club on the outside and the outside inside the club.
I like how you think.
The Butabi brothers, they'd be great venture capital firms. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things founders should ask themselves to understand whether or not they have product market fit. And when a founder, tries to ask me what it feels like, I say, well, I'll tell you what it doesn't feel like. I often start with, what are the no's? What are the things you don't have? I tell founders, ask themselves a few questions. Are customers getting value to the product? Is word of mouth spreading? Is usage slowing? Is your sales cycle taking too long? What sort of things do you recommend founders ask themselves about whether or not they have product market fit?
Enterprise, I think it's pretty straightforward. The first couple questions. Do you have a salesperson who can sell the product almost as good as you? Well, Paul, yeah, he opens the doors for me, but I got to go close. Nope. Answer's no. Or, yeah, I actually have one really doing it great. I want 3 more of them. The founder answers the question in a different way, right? They go, I have one that already works. I need 3 more. People who are post-product market fit are already in the mindset of scaling. People who are pre-product market fit are, I have one I'm still working with, and it's still under my control, and it's still in the lab, right? The ones who are out of the lab, the ones who are in the real world, it works. I need 3 more. They just talk about it in a really, really different way, even if they themselves don't know what post-product market fit is. For someone like me or you, Matt, we know what the words sound like when it's post-product market fit because they talk about it differently.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And would you say at the sort of seed plus stage where you invest at Bullpen, companies are disillusioned by when they think they have product market fit when they come to you for a fundraise, and then you have to explain to them, well, you actually have maybe a bit of product solution fit and you're almost at product market fit? Like, are they aware of that?
The disillusion in my office is very different than that, actually. Usually my companies have really non-trivial product market fit, but they went to the wrong school, they're in the wrong category, or the zeitgeist doesn't like what they're doing, or they're in North Carolina, right? So the disillusion is, I really feel like I got this figured out. Why does nobody believe me? And the more that they have that chip on their shoulder, that they really feel like they figured it out and no one believes them, that is the hallmark of a very good bullpen founder. And it's frequently because I'm doing fantasy sports in Edinburgh, Scotland. No one thinks that's a thing. And I'm in Edinburgh, Scotland, right? But wait a minute, you're doing $1 million in revenue and you only have 20,000 customers. This is a decade ago. You're doing $1 million in revenue. You only have 20,000 signups. Like, I've never seen numbers like that. That's way into product market fit. I believe you, right? I believe you. Here's a check. And so yes, of course, I do get founders who come into a pre-product market fit, and we're very clear with them. I think you're pre-product market fit for these reasons. But the disillusion in my office is I am at product market fit, and no one seems to believe me.
Those are the best ones to find when you're the first one to actually agree with them after everyone else has told them no, which is exciting. So let's talk about some of the best tests for product market fit that founders should consider. As we all know, entrepreneurs too often confuse product market fit with vanity metrics, i.e. numbers or stats that look good on paper, but don't really mean anything important. So what should they consider when testing themselves?
One is word of mouth referrals. Very, very important. I remember my first job when I started a little company when I dropped out of grad school, and I got acquired in the 99 bubble and went public. And I was a tech geek, and my CMO at the company said, Martino, I'm going to teach you a little bit about marketing. I said, okay, well, tell me about marketing. And of course, I'm poo-pooing marketing at this because I'm a smart tech geek. Like, this marketing thing's a bunch of crap. This guy, Joe Jennings, says to me, Martino, a market is a set of people who buy your product who talk to each other. Like, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. How you define a market as a set of people who buy your product who talk to each other? And I think I fought with this guy for like 2 years until I understood the brilliance of his definition of a market. If you are onesie twosie only selling to individual people and those people don't talk to each other about your product, guess what? You don't have a market because you have islands of people who love what you do and you don't have a market. And I have now come to understand the brilliance of what this guy told me 25 years ago, because unless you have that, and that's evidenced by NPS scores and refer a friend programs and viral loops on consumer sides and customer councils on the enterprise side. If that stuff's not going on, you don't have a market because you have islands, and those islands are all disconnected, and you'll get no network effect from it.
So let's double click on the NPS score. The Net Promoter Score is a tool to predict the magnitude of customers' love for a product or service. I feel that NPS scores are great once you've had product market fit and when you've started to really scale. Let's say you're at the sort of Series A, Series B level. But do you really think NPS scores are that valuable early on? Or is it just true word of mouth, virality kind of things that you should be looking at?
I find that the derivative, again, I'm going to be a math geek today. I find the derivative of the NPS scores to be valuable. The actual NPS scores I find to frequently be not valuable because in a vacuum, I don't know what they mean for this particular product. But if I go into a board meeting and the NPS score was 80 a week ago and it's 60 this week and they're projecting it to be 40 the week after, then I know something's wrong. Or on the opposite side, I know something's right. So I find the velocity associated with NPS scores to be highly predictive of where we are in almost this product market fit that we're talking about, Matt, where it goes up, it goes down. We found a sweet spot where I have a repeatable process. The derivative of the NPS score tells me a lot there. The absolute, not so much. I have some companies where an 80 would be great, and I have other companies where a 40 would be great because it just means different things for those markets.
Yeah, for us, we like to look at utilization. Like, how often are people touching and living in this product? Has it become mission critical for them? And how fast is the velocity at which they can go from, hearing about it to kind of getting involved and using it right away? Maybe their onboarding experience is so clear that they get value out of the product like day 3, which is amazing. Let's talk about some of the other misconceptions about product market fit and why it should always be evolving. Everyone knows Facebook was not the first social network, but it definitely is the most successful. Why? Because they did not rest on the fact that they found product market fit early, but they pursued product market scale. Facebook's approach to generating growth in a business with network effects not only captures that customer and that change in point of view, but keeps out a lot of their competitors. So what other misconceptions do you think, Paul, founders should be aware of?
That is like you're pouring salt on my wounds, by the way, with that example. So I started Tribe with Mark Pincus in 2002, 2 years before Facebook, literally. When Thiel invested in Facebook, he asked me and Mark to babysit Zuckerberg for a week, literally at our office. Obviously, he won. And this question has haunted me for almost 20 years of my life now. We started it in 2002. He started his in 2004. And he got something right out of the gate. He understood that the seed audience was very, very important. It being exclusive, it being attractive college kids in places that you aspired to go. Whereas Tribe was literally the people thrown off Friendster who wanted to party at Burning Man. Who's a more attractive seed audience for a scale company? Now, by the way, we kicked the crap out of Facebook if you wanted to organize a Burning Man party. I can tell you that. But that was not a scale use case. What Zuckerberg intimately understood was that there was a scale use case here, that attractive aspirational demographics to start from would lead to you to have a virtuous circle of people who want it to be there. And, I always ask myself, if we had figured that one thing out, would Tribe have been Facebook? Because we had a 2-year head start. And so he really figured it out, and his execution after he had that seed audience is among the legendary entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley history.
Well, I apologize for rubbing salt in the wound. I didn't mean that, but thank you for sharing that story. And I think product market scale is something that a lot of people ignore once they think they've had product market fit. And it ties nicely to that obvious product market fit is always evolving. I think it's always scaling, and you should always be chasing that product market scale. But let's talk about premature scaling, because Steve Blank said that a business that is scaling prematurely is spending significant amount of money on growth before it has discovered and developed product market fit. For example, Friendster, Dig, all suffered from premature scaling along with Groupon, but they were able to fix it with a pivot and save themselves. So what lessons have you learned about premature scaling as an investor? And what advice do you have for founders on how to avoid this?
It is the single most awful situation to be in for you as an investor, for you as the founder. I think Koppelman over at First Round calls it false positive, right? False positive is basically the equivalent phrase of what you're talking about, premature scale, to use Blank's term. They're the most painful companies in your portfolio because you thought you had product market fit. You went and hired the sales force, and then you realized you sold 6 different products for 8 different reasons, and you now have a sales force of 30 people. Our most painful example of this in the portfolio, we had a great company called Double Dutch, and it was one of the first mobile first CRMs. So Salesforce did not have a good mobile first CRM. It was a completely web-based app. They didn't know mobile from the hole in the ground. And we had this really cool company. Lawrence was the CEO, really great guy, understood that mobile first CRM could be its own category. Raised a bunch of money. KKR came in, made it to $35 million run rate. I mean, usually you make it to $35 million run rate, like, you know what's going on. But eventually the renewals stopped and you started talking to the customers and you realized you had exactly what I said. You had 10 different customers who brought 8 different sub-products. And you're in the spot where you've raised $50, $80 million and you kind of look at the board and go, I don't really have a company, guys. This is among the most painful spots you can get on the board in any company. And Double Dutch is probably one of our examples of that.
Wow. I mean, premature scaling is facing every single startup at some point in their growth. But I feel, especially now, with the amount of capital that's pouring in from the Tiger Globals in the world and the Sequoias and so on, it's forcing companies to premature scale. You know, it's the opposite of this blitzscaling model, premature scaling. Blitzscaling forces you to scale before you're ready for it. So how should founders think about balancing that when they do have, $25 million poured on top of them?
That's exactly. We call this the SoftBank effect inside of our portfolio. We had this little dog walking company in Los Angeles called WAG that was doing great. And SoftBank showed up and said, hey, I know you're looking for 75. How about you take 300 instead? And oh, by the way, if you don't take my 300, I'll give it to your competitor. This is an absolute nightmare of a conversation to have as an investor with your founders. It is just a horrible situation. The company barely knew how to spend 75, and I feel like it's kind of getting blackmailed to take 300. There's no way this is going to go well. And of course it didn't go well. But at the same point in time, you're the founders. How can you not take $300 million from SoftBank? And so, yeah, I feel very strongly about this. This is it is a company ruiner to do. And only through a kind of miracle save and heroic work by one of our guys, Duncan Davidson, and some of the founders, and we got the company back from SoftBank, and now it's back to growing at the rate it should have been. Wow, what a mistake, though, along the way to have done this.
I mean, holy shit. You have just explained exactly why money does not solve problems for a lot of these companies. I mean, they had no problems before. Everything was going along great. And then somebody came in and blackmailed them with, triple the amount of money they actually needed to spend. And then said, if they don't take the money, they're going to go somewhere else and eat at them from underneath. So how do you think founders should really have these conversations with their existing investors and potentially newer investors who are offering them more than what they ask? Should they just rest back on their, existing financial models and say, look, I appreciate you want to give me 250, but I only need 25 million.
You have to be disciplined about this. I'm not sure you're going to solve the problem with the smaller amount of money, but I know you won't solve it with the more amount of money. So I'd rather at least give you a ticket to the dance than guarantee the failure of your company. And so you have to have discipline around the use of proceeds that's responsible for the stage of the company you're at. And if you tell me I've got 25 over here I know how to spend and 75 is my rainy day fund, I'm going to go, no, that's not a good idea. Get 25 over here you know how to spend and you're going to take 40? Okay, let's go do that. Like there's a responsible cushion and advanced projects team you want to support to go do it, but it's not 25 to 75. It's just, it's not 3 times, it's not 5 times what you asked for.
Wow. I mean, what a real world example you've given our listeners and our founders out there to understand the pros and cons of taking 10x the amount of money you actually had planned for and the bets you were going to make, how drastically things can change by doing that. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of the premature scaling conversation, we're in a time now where everyone is hiring like crazy because they've raised these massive seed rounds and massive Series A rounds. And I would say not a lot of them definitely have product market fit. And so what about hiring before you get product market fit? Do you have advice to some of the founders out there? Because Sam Altman says doing it before product market fit slows you down, and hiring after you get product market fit speeds you up. So he recommends that you wait until you find product market fit so that your goals are live as long as possible before, iterate as quickly as possible before, so that when you finally get it, you can start to make real bets. What are your views on hiring pre versus post product market fit?
I totally agree with the analogy that Altman uses in this case, and I'll add to it. There's a certain kind of person you hire pre-product market fit, and a certain kind of person you hire post-product market fit. We use this in our sales by sales analogies. We say companies are in the 0 to 1 stage, they're in the 1 to 100 stage, or they're in the greater than 100 stage. And by the way, the units don't matter. It could be customers, it could be millions of dollars. There are 3 stages of salespeople. And we frequently invest in the 1 to 100 stage where they're past the 0 to 1 product market fit, but they're certainly not in a spot where it's time to go hire the head of North American sales. That's a totally different stage of person to bring in. And so in the sales world, I find that there are 3 classes of people that match a bit to this kind of Altman view of hire as few as possible early, hire a lot more later. Hire the right kinds of people at each of those stages of scale as well, or you're going to end up with a big problem as well. You end up with I know how to grow a North American sales team person when you're in the pre-product market fit stage. You know how that's going to end.
Yeah, I mean, we tell our companies hire makers versus managers before you have product market fit. And then after you have it, then you can start to get into those managers/makers. But you want people who can iterate really quickly and who are obviously invested in the mission and the vision of what you're trying to build early on, rather than just being there for the complete upside scenario only, which is something we try to tell our founders, which I assume is similar to what you do at Bullpen as well.
I love that phrase. I must admit, I had not heard that one before. I like that. Makers versus managers. Excellent. I mean, I feel it in my bones what the difference is between those two. I'd never heard that phrase, though.
Well, feel free to use it. I'd love to hear how Bullpen Capital has been formed to help founders find product market fit. And what are your plans now for the fund?
It's actually more of the same. As I mentioned earlier, I started 8 companies now. And Bullpen is the only one of the 8 where the business plan I wrote on day 1 is still what I'm doing on year 12. Only one. All 7 of the others, massive pivots, rip it up, start again. But we identified this market need between seed and A, and we have basically done the same thing for 12 years. I think we're going to do the same thing for the next 12 years. There's always now going to be a gap between the very democratic, take all takers, seed world and the very high bar Series A world. I think that's never going to change now. I think it's a permanent structural feature. And Bullpen's going to stick to its knitting, being the 7th and 8th inning pitcher in between the starting pitcher, which is your first rounds and your floodgates, and the closers, which are your Andreessen Horowitzes and your Sequoias. And the next 12 years, I think are going to feel a lot the same. We're going to coach the companies. We're going to help them scale. We're going to help them hire and fire, by the way. Part of the next stage of scale is the people you outgrew who were makers who couldn't become managers, right? And that's painful. And coaching a CEO, a first-time CEO on how to do that, that's a core value proposition of our fund.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds incredible what you've built. I mean, the name says it all. Bullpen, seventh inning, eighth inning support for bringing things home to roost is incredible. And we tell our founders the people you start the company with are most likely not the people you finish the company with. Almost 90% of the time is the way to think about it. So don't be shocked when you have to make those tough decisions between maybe a seed and a Series A or Series A and beyond. So I appreciate you sharing that. Before we wrap things up, we always love to ask our guests for their fast favorites, where I name 5 categories and you list off your favorites of each. So first, let's start off with your favorite podcast.
Oh, that's Whistleblower for sure. About scandals in sports, Whistleblower.
Yeah, I figured you would say something like that. Second is your favorite newsletter or blog.
It's anything from Matt Otko's Twitter/feed. Read Matt Otko Data Collective, Polymath of Extraordinary Intellect. He's my go-to.
That's a good one. Third, favorite tech gadget.
I'm a late adopter, so I must admit, I got nothing on that one.
Not even your iPhone or your Android?
No, dude, I'm a Luddite. Like at Bullpen, you aren't even allowed to give a product demo when you come in because it's got to be about the numbers. And if I have to use your product, it means I can't invest.
Okay, I'll make sure our founders know about that. Fourth, favorite new trend.
Everything that is related to the democratization of access to capital. I just love that there are so many ways that you can get your company off the ground now. You got Kickstarter, you've got seed funds, you've got incubators. I just love that this very clubby world of venture capital has new entry points. I think this trend is going to continue. It's great for everybody.
Absolutely. Even if it's more competition for people like us, I think it's great for all the entrepreneurs and founders out there. And that's the main goal for what we're here to support. And last but not least, your favorite book.
I really love a book called The Burden of Bad Ideas because it's all about how groupthink can really, really ruin any good idea.
Well, that's an awesome suggestion. Thanks for sharing it. And thanks for joining us in the tank today with Paul Martino from Bullpen Capital to discuss why product market fit should always be evolving. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Great to be here.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode or to check out previous episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter at Matty B. Cohen or at Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,